Okay, welcome everyone. For the sake of time, it is 11, so we are going to start our webinar today. Thank you all for taking the time to join us. We will be going over probate bonds. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, a couple of quick introductions first, then we will do an overview of what probate bonds are. Next, we'll dive into the underwriting process and what is required, and then we will actually show you how to apply for a probate bond. And then at the end, we will answer whatever questions that you have. So I'm going to go ahead and let Benton introduce himself first. Benton, if you want to talk about who you are and what your role is here at Bond Exchange.
Thank you, Taylor. I'm in business development, but was originally an underwriter here on the commercial team. So I have a ton of experience with probate, help with agency outreach and helping agents get started on our platform with their first bond. So it's kind of my role now, hybrid underwriter, business development, more so on the business development side.
Absolutely, yes. My name is Taylor. I am also on the business development side, and Benton is such a big help that we essentially stole him. So we have the benefit of having an underwriter on this webinar today to answer our questions and walk us through this process. So let's go ahead and dive in. And before I kind of explain what probates are and what they entail and all the underwriting stuff, I do just want to mention that these are more of a sensitive topic, these bonds in particular, right? Well, you'll see when we're talking about who needs them, what questions you ask. So we know that this isn't going to be the easiest bond that your client is applying for. So we want to provide as much information as we can so that as an agent, you really are their resource and the person who's holding their hands and hopefully streamlining this process for them. Because again, it's not a super fun moment for these people. So we are trying to give you as much as you can to then turn around and make it as easy as possible on them. Of course, if you do have any questions at all, please feel free to put them in the Q&A, and when we get to the end of it today, we will answer them for you. So with that being said, let's go ahead and dive in. So probate bonds are going to be required by a probate court, typically as a prerequisite to an individual assuming the fiduciary role over an estate's assets. So probate bonds protect the beneficiaries of an estate from financial harm if the fiduciary of the estate, your client applying for the bond, breaches any of their fiduciary duties. So this is going to be broken down into two different sects of people who might need these bonds. So we will first talk about a deceased person and the different types of bonds that they have. I want to make note that these are the definitions that are most commonly used for these bonds, but you will see some states sort of using them interchangeably. So we're happy to walk you through that process as well if and when you have to apply for these. But typically, the most common definitions would be an executor, which is required for a fiduciary who has been designated in the will as the executor of an individual who has passed away, as opposed to an administrator bond that's required for a fiduciary handling the affairs of an individual who has passed away without a will. So that's going to be the difference there. Next, we have probate bonds for minor or incompetent person. Again, we have two different versions here. We have our conservatorship. It's going to be required for a fiduciary who administers the estate of a ward. These are only going to be responsible for financial decisions rather than the health and well-being of that ward, as opposed to the guardianship bond. It's going to be required for the fiduciary if they are also going to make health-related decisions on top of those financial decisions. And this again would be for a minor or an incompetent person according to the courts. Okay. Underwriting. So this is why we steal Benton. So we're going to go over general underwriting and then we'll dive into more specifics.
Great. Thank you, Taylor. So yeah, we're just going to go through the very basics of this. There is a lot more to discuss, but we just wanted to give a brief and summary overview of the underwriting process for these. So first and foremost, what is the bond amount? That's going to be important for determining what items are going to be needed to get this underwritten. At the smaller amounts, they can typically be automatically quoted on our website. Once you start getting to the higher amounts, we're going to need to review court documents, as well as potentially a personal financial statement of the applicant, which we would provide a form for that. They needn't have that already prepared before applying. Anyways, over $250,000 for executor administrator bonds. Those we're going to need personal financial statements, and we're going to want to look at those court documents definitely in those cases. So that's why that's important. And for conservator guardianship, it's over 100,000. So then attorney involvement, that's pretty important. That can help alleviate a lot of the risk associated with these bonds. If you have legal counsel, you're much less likely to misappropriate funds. You're going to have that advice throughout the guardianship or conservatorship or executor administratorship. And it's way less likely that there's going to be a situation that will lead to a claim when that final accounting is done or halfway through that. So anyways, continuing here. Does the estate include an ongoing business or illiquid assets? That's just important for, again, determining the risk associated with the estate. If there's an ongoing business, there definitely should be a plan in place for how that is going to be handled, how it's going to be managed moving forward, especially if they do not plan on selling it or transferring ownership. There's going to have to be a plan in place for that to be approved so that the surety feels comfortable providing a policy for it. Illiquid assets, that's just important because in many states, they're not actually including real estate in the bond amount until it is sold. So once that real estate is liquidated, that could lead to an increase in the bond amount. It's just pertinent to know whether or not there's going to be an increase in the bond amount midterm, or if that home is going to be kept in the estate or transferred directly to the heirs. And then, of course, it wouldn't really be relevant. And then who is the bond for? Again, Taylor was going through the different bond types. That's just going to help us determine what bond form and what information needs to be on the bond form when we're determining, what kind of risk is going on here. So.
Absolutely. And then we're going to have some questions for these as well. So we're going to talk about best questions for deceased first.
Sure. So relationship to the decedent, typically a direct family member is the most preferred relationship in this case. So, a sibling or child or spouse is going to be the preferred relationship for approval. And then what are the estate's assets? Again, we kind of touched on this earlier. The assets in the estate, liquid assets, tend to be more risky. They can be, dispersed by the fiduciary, so they're going to have full responsibility over that. Illiquid assets, of course, if they're not being liquidated, are going to be less relevant in terms of risk. And then any disputes among the heirs, this is a big one. If there are any disputes, that's a pretty big red flag for a carrier. You want to make sure that isn't the case when you're sending in an application. Most carriers are going to flat out decline those, so you just want to make sure that any of those disputes are resolved before initiating the application process.
Absolutely. Okay, perfect. And then, if you can talk us through the minor or incompetent additional questions.
Yep. So what is the health condition of the ward? That's just going to be pertinent for how much responsibility the fiduciary is going to have during for the duration of the estate. So, if they're incompetent and need a lot of health attention, there's going to be a lot more responsibility for the fiduciary. And then where does the ward reside? How involved is the fiduciary in the ward's life? Do they live together? Typically, that is a good thing if they're living together, or if a parent is taking care of an incompetent child or a minor, that we would want to see them living together and being fully responsible in that sense. And how old is the ward? That's just going to determine whether or not we're dealing with a guardianship of a minor or if it is an adult ward. So that will help determine the bond type and associated risk. A minor is a little bit riskier given they probably aren't aware of the money that they're owed from the estate, and if the fiduciary has full control over that, it's just something to keep in mind.
Okay, perfect. And then last, we're going to dive into best practices.
All right, so it's always beneficial to obtain the court documents regardless of the bond amount. These are almost always requested when it gets referred. And if there's any issues with the estate, we're definitely going to want to review these. This could include of appointment, so that would be the court pretty much designating the fiduciary as the appointed individual for managing the estate, but also if a settlement took place beforehand, if there's any other issues in court that happened prior to the probate case being opened, we would want to take a look at that just to get the full picture of what's going on there. And then last will and testament, those are court documents too. If there is a will, it's definitely beneficial to provide that. That'll just reassure the carrier that the appointed fiduciary is named in the will, that the number of heirs can be confirmed, and their relationship to the decedent. So just kind of confirming all the information that likely will be already contained in the application, and then any other stipulations in there that are relevant to getting the bond underwritten. Attorney involvement, of course, I mentioned that earlier. It significantly increases approval rate by alleviating that risk with legal counsel. We can still approve those without an attorney. It's just a lot more difficult in a lot of cases when the estate's larger. So if we're having trouble getting one approved, we're going to typically recommend getting an attorney. But also, if the applicant's credit isn't very strong, an attorney's going to help out with that. But also, we're looking at about 650 being the credit score minimum. So if credit isn't very strong, we have creative ways of getting them approved. It's very rare that we decline a probate submission. So one of those options could be a co-signer, one of the other heirs willing to share in the liability of the bond, even though they would not be taking on those fiduciary responsibilities. And then, very importantly, advise the client that the bond must be released by the court. Time and time again, we have individuals who reach out to us saying that, this case has been closed. If it's a conservatorship or guardianship, if the individual passed away or the minor is no longer 18, we need documents to demonstrate that the estate has been closed. The carrier will keep billing term after term until those are provided. The bond will be canceled on a prorated basis. So if those documents are dated months prior to today's date, for example, then there would be return premium associated with that. So just make sure the client knows that the surety isn't capable of canceling these bonds. They stay in force until the court closes out the case. So they need to be released by the court for the bond to be terminated.
That makes sense, right? If the probate court is requiring the bond, that makes sense that they would want to close it. Okay.
And then also one more note, it's after the final accounting has been done. Okay. Claims can be very heavy at that stage. That's when they're going through all the transactions, all the accounting that took place for the duration of the estate. That's when they find things that maybe were appropriated incorrectly. So we just want to make sure that the client's aware of that.
Okay, got it. Very helpful. All right. So that is sort of a general underwriting. Again, we're talking sort of in theory here. So we're going to show you an actual live probate application. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And I am going to hand the reins over to Benton here, and he can walk us through that. This is why we stole him.
Thank you, Taylor. Okay. So I'm going to hop right into this. This is, as soon as you log into our platform, this is the welcome dashboard. We're going to hop right into a new quote right here. And we're going to be doing a North Carolina probate bond. This is going to be an executor bond. Again, that is if there's a will. So it tends to be a less risky bond type. We're hoping to get this automatically quoted on our platform for this example. So yes, it is needed in North Carolina. We know the bond needed, and our system actually simplifies it for agents. So really you just need to type the word probate. And once you do so, it's going to filter to the correct application you're needing. So you can see here all the 4 types are listed. The system will automatically determine which one is needed based on your responses to the questions provided. So we're going to say yes here and continue. And then at this stage, you can send it to your customer, of course. We're going to say no here so that we can show you this whole application process. We are the experts of probate bonds, so we're going to figure out which one you need. In this case, we are doing an executorship, so that is a deceased individual who left a will. tends to be less risky in that case. So we're going to go ahead and select this option here. And then you're going to provide the name of the individual who is applying, the fiduciary. All right. And then you're going to provide their home address. That is typically needed for the bond form. And then their email. Phone number. And then we ask for the probate court's address. This is in case the carrier needs to send any documentation to the court, or if the court, for just any outreach that may be needed by the surety. So we can just go ahead and provide the court's address here. Well, that's not really going to work. It has to be in North Carolina.
Yeah.
All right. So in North Carolina, the bond amount has to be when it's less than 100,000, it has to be equal to 1.25 times the estate value. When they're greater than 100,000, it has to be 1.1 times the estate value. In this case, we're going to do a bond for 200,000. All right. And we're going to imagine that this is one of Joseph's parents. And then we're going to ask when the decedent passed away. This is important because if there's a long period of time between the probate case being opened, it can suggest additional risk. Perhaps a settlement took place or there were ongoing disputes that had to be resolved prior. So that is definitely an important piece of information to gather from your client. And as indicated earlier, we're doing an executor bond. So in this case, we are going to imagine that Joseph's parent did leave a will. So we're going to select yes here. And Joseph is the son of this individual. So we're going to put child. And as indicated earlier, the bond amount is a multiple of the estate assets. To keep it simple, we're just going to put cash here. So you'll notice that this cash amount is actually lower than the bond amount, which is how it should be. If the estate assets exceed the bond amount, there will be a question asking for you to explain why that is the case. There are scenarios where the court won't include certain assets, but for example, in North Carolina, they don't typically include real estate as part of the estate assets that contribute to the bond amount. So we're going to leave that blank here, but just know that in North Carolina and some other states, they're not going to include real estate in the bond amount calculation.
And I just want to point out here that if you guys have any questions while you're applying for these bonds on our platform, you can see there's a chat function at the bottom, or you can definitely reach out to an underwriter just in case you're not sure. If you want to just double check with the information that you're putting in, they'd be happy to answer those questions for you.
Thank you for that, Taylor. That is correct. You'll be put in touch with an underwriter if you start a chat here. It'll always be someone on our commercial team who will help you continue through this process. All right, we're going to imagine Joe had one sibling. So in this case, that would be 2 heirs. If it was just Joe, it'd be 1. So we'll go ahead and select that. It's important to get the number of heirs when you're getting that information from your client. And does the applicant have an attorney? We're going to imagine that Joseph does. He's on top of it and wants to make sure everything is done correctly. And then it's going to ask you for the attorney's information.
Just to clarify, put their actual name in there. We're doing this for the example. I'm sure you get it, but we would need their actual names most of the time.
Mm-hmm. That is true. All right, this is another important question. Is the bond required on demand of an interested party other than the court? This would be, for example, a creditor. So if Joseph's father or mother owed money to some creditor before passing away, this would be an important piece of information. Just the carrier just needs to know how that would be handled and whether or not that debt exceeds the estate assets. So we're going to select no here. Are there any disputes among the heirs? We're going to imagine no. Joe and his sibling get along great and have no qualms with how the estate assets should be distributed. And does this bond replace a prior bond? That would be in the case of a prior administrator or executor passing away halfway through the probate case, or if the case is moving from one state to another, a new bond will be needed for that new court. This is pretty uncommon, but it does happen from time to time, and it's something the carrier needs to be aware of. So we're going to select no in this case. And then this is somewhat related to that prior question, is Joseph replacing a prior administrator? It can also be that the prior administrator or executor doesn't want to continue it, has too much other stuff going on. It could be totally a normal situation with no problems at all, still something the carrier needs to be made aware of. And then ongoing business, we mentioned this earlier, there just has to be a plan in place for that business if it's going to remain in the estate. And does Joseph owe any money to the estate? That is a clear conflict of interest. If so, if Joseph owed money to the estate and had complete control over the estate, it is a clear conflict of interest. So this is definitely something to consider when you're gathering that information from your client. Your client should not owe any money to the estate, though this is extremely uncommon. It's definitely a risk the carrier needs to be aware of. Has Joseph ever been convicted of crime? We're going to imagine he's a great citizen and has not been, so we'll continue that. All right, and now we are just going to need Joseph's social security number. This is for that soft credit check I mentioned, which is required for bonds. Very small bonds, we're not going to require this, but this is $200,000, so it wouldn't really be considered a small bond amount, but it still is within the range that we can quote these. And by the way, Joseph is not a real individual. This is one of our Experian example clients, so we are not giving you his real social security number. All right, and then if for whatever reason they aren't ready to file this with a court, you can make it any day, 30 days after today's date. You could make it prior to today's date, but I can't imagine a situation where that would be beneficial. Mainly, if you want to account for the time it'll take to mail, want to make sure your client's paying exactly what they should be. If they're not going to file it till Friday, might as well make it start Friday. So we'll go ahead and do that. All right, there we go. Joe has been approved. So we have 3 different quote options here. The years 2 and 3 are going to be provided on a prorated basis. So the second and third year will be discounted. But typically clients want to go with 1 year. They don't imagine it's going to take too much longer than that. It can, but most clients are probably going to opt for the 1 year option in this case. But I just want to note for guardianships, we're typically going to have to collect a premium up front until the minor turns 18, knowing that the bond will have to remain in force until that time, until the minor turns 18. So you'll be paid 20% commission on this bond. Do you want to add a broker fee? In this case, we're going to say no, but you always have the ability to do that on our platform. And then at this stage, you can send it to your customer again, except at this portion of the application, they will only need to sign and pay for the bond online. It makes it very simple to get this issued, and they'll have access to the digital copy immediately. The court is going to require the original copy that we mail out, so just keep that in mind. And oftentimes we do have to add a piece or two of information before we actually print and mail it out. So if the application is missing 1 or 2 items, just don't be alarmed. We're going to review it and make sure that everything is completed correctly before we mail it out. So we're going to select no here just to continue through the remainder of the process from the agent's perspective. All right, so at this stage, you'll have to get a signature for the agreement. We're going to upload a blank one to continue here, but we do review these, so don't upload a blank one in this case. But that'll allow us to proceed. And we're going to go with standard shipping, but you can always get FedEx overnight if you were interested for $30 anywhere in the country. And then we're going to go ahead and have it mailed to the agency just so that we can have some control over it. And you could have it mailed directly to your customer as well, or a separate delivery address if you're interested. And we're going to go with 1 year, as I indicated earlier. All right, and we're going to imagine that we got just as payment information. So we'll go ahead and go with a customer payment. We can take credit card or bank account. So if you wanted to pay with e-check, you just enter that information there. We have a phony credit card we use in this case. So we're going to go with that. All right, and the system is in the process of collecting this payment, creating the policy documents, getting those confirmation emails sent out, and giving us access to the documents immediately after they are processed. And there we go. You can give us some feedback if you're interested, but you have the ability to download the bond, payment receipt, agent invoice, principal invoice, or return to your dashboard. And that pretty much sums up submitting a probate bond application on our platform. So I'm going to hand it back to Taylor. She'll bring us to the Q&A, and we'll answer any questions you all might have.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Benton. So that was an actual live probate application. So I'm just going to share my screen here one more time. Okay. All right. So I want to put all of our contact information on the screen just in case anybody needs to hop out or you just want to write it down. But let's go ahead and dive into what questions we have. Okay. Let's see. I have one for you here, Benton. What if they are older and don't utilize email?
All right, thank you, Taylor. So in that case, you maybe could put the attorney's email. We do recommend against putting your own email. Perhaps they have a family member whose email you could add there. When you put the agent's email, it can confuse our system a bit. We try to group our applications by applicant, and email is one of those things that we're using to make sure that the applicant is consolidated on our system. So I wouldn't recommend using your own email. You could use a phony email, but I don't recommend that either. Best practice would be to get a relative's email who can help them out.
Okay. Bob Hartzell, you had a question about appointments. I will email you after this and we can go over that. So I will be emailing you directly. Okay. Do you have any training for bonds on your website or anywhere else I can learn more about bonds and surety products and business? We absolutely do. So if you go to bondexchange.com and hit the article at the top that says blog, we have a ton of blog articles about different types of bonds, what's required, what they're asking for. So I definitely recommend doing that. You can search by bond type, you can search by state, whatever is easiest for you. We also have information on there about marketing bonds, how to make bonds profitable, all sorts of information. I also recommend checking out Bond Exchange on YouTube. We put all of our past webinars on there, as well as informational videos about how to use our platform, information about additional bonds as well. So we will try to provide as much training as possible on bonds. We really are trying to be a source of content for our agents. Okay.
All right, I can answer this next one, Brian. Excellent question. Would a trust supersede a probate bond, or do they go hand in hand? Excellent question. Typically, if there is a trust that secures the liquid assets, a probate bond is not required. However, in North Carolina, for example, if the fiduciary is out of state, it doesn't matter. The estate assets could be totally secured, restricted, and only be accessible when there's a court order or how it's designated by the will, in which case it typically wouldn't require a bond. However, North Carolina has a statute that requires any state fiduciary to get a bond, regardless of there being a trust involved. So yes, they can supersede a probate bond, but they can also go hand in hand, just depending on the state that we're working with.
Absolutely. And sorry, I'm just going to try to answer questions that aren't related to questions we've kind of already answered. We have quite a few here, so I'm just going to scroll through and see
I
James
can,
asking about an
okay.
online account. I will also just reach out to you off when we're done with the webinar. So I will reach out to you. And then I'll just answer this quick one about automatic credit-based underwriting. We do have automatic credit-based underwriting. Again, that's why we do that soft credit check that will be needed for several types of bonds. So we do have the ability to do that. Okay. And then, sorry, I'm just trying to answer the non underwriting ones really quickly. I will be, everybody on this webinar will get a recording of this. So you can share that with your staff. You can keep it for your records. All of that will be handled. Okay. All right, Benton, just shout if you see any questions for you.
All right. So Michelle, you asked, I see major advantages to completing the application online. However, if the applicant is not tech savvy, is there a paper application available? Yes, there absolutely is. You're welcome to reach out to service@bondexchange.com, or I can send it to you after this webinar if you're interested. We do have a paper application available in those cases.
Okay.
And then what is a broker fee? A broker fee is a additional fee you can add on top of the total amount paid by the customer. So you will get 20% commission, but on top of that, you could add an additional fee that would be made payable to your agency after the bond's issued, and it would be, you know, the lump sum of both the commission and that broker fee together. What is the maximum agency fee or standard fee? I believe the system limits it at like $999, but we can increase it manually if interested. They may have removed that since I last checked, but I believe it is $999.
Okay. Let's see here. Can you purchase a bond if the requirement of a bond has been waived in the will? Interesting question.
So if the bond has been waived by the will, typically the court isn't going to require it. You don't really want to have your client get a bond if they don't need it. That is really adding risk to themselves that they may, you don't want to add risk to them if not necessary. There could be a will that waives the bond requirement and the bond still be required for other reasons. So in that case, yes, absolutely. I would say you typically do not want to get a bond unless required. Sometimes one of the heirs will want to have a have a bond, even if there is a will, waiving it. In those cases, a bond could be required, but it's up to the judge.
Okay.
Okay, so when the bond amount is determined, who determines the estate value? That would be handled in court. That would all be itemized on the court documents, and then the judge would order what the bond amount needed is. But it will, again, be that simple multiplier calculation of the estate assets.
Oh my goodness, you guys, you have so many great questions. Okay. Felicia, so if you are in the application, you absolutely, if you exit an application at any point, when you go back in, it'll be there. Same thing, if you end up emailing it to your customer, it'll email it from where you left off, not from the beginning of the bond application.
Yeah, and on top of that, at any stage in the application, I may have neglected to mention this, in the top right corner of the center window of the stepper, there's a little email icon. At any stage of the application, you can have that sent to your customer to complete the remaining steps on their end.
Okay, where are we at here?
So Jessica has a great question. Looks very user-friendly. Would the bond need to be paid in full? Yes, these need release, as we talked about earlier. So they always need to be paid in full. Any bond that needs release will need to be paid in full for each term. But again, if they are canceled midterm per release from the court, we'll be able to provide a prorated refund for that term.
That goes perfectly with the question right under that.
Yeah, so can you close bonds with receipt and releases from the heirs instead of the final accounting? They need to be official court documents for the carrier to accept it. So those would always be provided by the court. indicating that the estate has been closed. So the heir signing off doesn't quite cut it because the final accounting in the court is, again, a very risky time in the estate. So we would need to see the court documents.
Let's see.
What is the standard broker fee that brokers charge? There really isn't. It varies. I would say most agents typically don't. They're typically just trying to get it done, but it varies. Depends on the agency. Some will have like a standard $100. Some will charge a bit more if it's a tedious bond type, but it varies quite a bit.
I have a couple of anonymous questions here asking me to reach out to you. So if you've put in a comment about if you had a specific question about a particular bond application or just needing an appointment, I'm writing those down and I will reach out to you at the end of the webinar as well.
So, Christopher, are probate bonds very competitive on pricing? Does the attorney usually do such an outreach for bond, or is it the executor? So usually the client is reaching out. We do have attorneys reaching out to us from time to time. Of course, we need an agent. We are a wholesaler, so we're typically trying to write them with an agent attached. But customers do come to us often. Usually when they come to us, they don't have an attorney. Some attorneys have established relationships with nearby insurance agents. I have this one agent in Virginia who's right across the street from the probate court there. They have a very tedious process where the power of attorney has to actually be present in the courthouse and sign for the bond in person and seal it in person. So that is a great relationship for those attorneys. They just walk across the street, get their bond through us, and then she's able to provide it to them so that she can go sign for it in the court as power of attorney for the carrier.
And this actually wasn't a question on here, but I just want to follow that up. We get asked a lot by agents about different people they should be partnering with to sell more bonds. So probate and estate attorneys would be great for that reason. Again, whether it's them reaching out or they have a client who needs it, that'll sort of be a really good 3-person transaction that we need an agent anyway. So definitely try to partner with them if you don't already.
Okay, so we have a question from Charles. Confirm the impact of real estate upon bond amount and underwriting. Depends on the state and the situation, but typically real estate is not incorporated into the bond amount. Typically, any real assets are not. But if they are liquidated or plan to be liquidated, that would increase the bond amount once that has taken place. If the real estate is not sold throughout the duration of the estate, the heirs keep it and just co-own it, then it typically is not in the bond amount. All right.
Okay. Oh man.
When is the bond usually purchased? Typically the bond is purchased. The best time to purchase it would be once the letters of appointment have been provided by the court. Some courts won't provide them until a bond's been produced, and we're aware of that. So if they haven't been appointed yet and they're told they need a bond, that's typically when they're getting it, whenever they're advised they need it, sometimes without official documentation that they need it. Okay, what other information would be needed if there is no will? Not really much more than we have already indicated. The will is kind of like a supporting document rather than a necessary document. If we know it exists, it does become necessary, but it confirms, who the heirs are, who's been appointed or for the fiduciary by the decedent. So if there is no will, we would need confirmation of the heirs involved. Typically that is represented in another court document. The court is going to provide all that information, their ages and relationships to the ward could be included in court documents most of the time. So again, that would just fall under the court document requirement, just so we can confirm that information without having to have the client go through all of that for us. We can just take a look at the court documents.
Okay. We have a question here that just says, how about $1 million probate bond? I'm not sure if they're asking about premium or requirements. So Andy.
Andy, we can definitely write probate bonds of any size. I've experienced writing much larger ones, over 10 million even. So that's definitely something we can do. It will not be auto quoted, just to be frank with you. It will get referred to an underwriter. When it comes to materials needed, it's going to be generally the same stuff. So long as everything checks out, it's going to be pretty much the same story unless there's something to be wary of. Of course, underwriters are going to be taking a closer look at the estate assets and everything involved. Typically, when they're very large and required, I don't want to say blanket, but a lot of the times people have an estate that large, they have a plan in place. It's already set up by an attorney who has it going to a trust when they pass away, has everything handled to where a bond will not be required. So really large probate bonds can be adverse selection, though sometimes they aren't at all. For example, if there's a settlement, a ton of assets that couldn't have been included in the will, maybe, they don't have a will yet because they were younger and didn't get to that stage. I have written a bond for an individual for a couple actually, for wrongful death scenarios. That would be a case when there could be a very large bond amount, but not necessarily any red flags or anything to suggest that it otherwise wouldn't be required, because settlement assets are not going to be secured most of the time, as we mentioned with the trust situation earlier.
Yeah. Okay. Answered. Dennis, I'll reach out to you.
Jill, we run into issues where the client doesn't provide info from the court to cancel the bond, and the bond is billed continuously. In cases like this, will bond exchange handle the billing for the bond, or is this up to the agent? We are always happy to reach out to the client. We don't like to step around our agents, so typically we're reaching out to our agents first. If the agent indicates to us that the client is totally unreachable, has gone MIA, is ignoring everything, all their communications, and we reach out and experience the same thing, it's probably going to be that the bond gets shifted over to direct bill with the carrier. The carriers are very familiar with this possibility that the bills will continue indefinitely. Some of our carriers will send them to collections, so it's definitely not advisable. We will advise the client if that's a possibility. So we definitely don't want to be in that situation, but it does happen. And, we're hopeful that we don't have to deal with that. But yes, we would not put the burden on the agent if the client went MIA on both us and the agent. That definitely would not be the case.
Jill asked, did we must use the original bond that is mailed to us, or can we use can we print this bond and use this copy?
The original bond is required in all cases. I did mention Virginia. So if, we provide gold seals in that case, we still have to mail those out, and you'll have to stick those onto the bond form in the courthouse. So you could use a printed copy in that case and then stick the seals on to make it an original copy upon signing it in the courthouse, but you always need the original copy for the court.
Because it's sealed, right? You want the hard copy because it actually has a seal. The print won't have that, is the difference.
Yeah, and the courts are pretty adamant about it too. We have some obligees who will accept printed copies, which really isn't advisable for them. I mean, someone could make a fake document potentially. So you'd think that they would all want original copies, but sometimes they accept them. Probate courts, I've never had a situation where they haven't required the original. Who normally pays for the bond, i.e. estate? Typically the estate. That is an expense that can be pulled from the estate and will be approved to be debited to the estate. So that's typically how it's paid. Sometimes the fiduciary will pay for it themselves, but it is advisable to use it for the estate, as it is the estate insuring itself.
Okay, we are running out of time here. We're going to try to get through just a couple more of these. I have one that's easy for me to answer. Are probate bonds available for self-service quoting via your widget? Yes, for up to a certain extent. But yes, you can still do the quote. And then if we need an underwriter to review it, then we will do that as well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
got
up to
one.
250,000 for administrator executor, up to 100,000 for conservator or guardian.
Okay.
That can be automatically quoted. And I see one from Eric here. When a bond is canceled midterm, is there a guaranteed minimum premium, such as most access lines and PST carriers is at 25? So for probate, the first year is always earned. So you will not get prorated returns on the first year. Every year after that, yes, there will be prorated return premium. Even if it was 1 day into the term, it would be prorated all the way back to that 1 day after the first year. On court bonds, assume collateral is required. Is this usually a problem? If so, what are options in lieu of cash? So civil court bonds are a different category than probate bonds. Those typically do require collateral. Probate bonds typically do not. I've never run into a case where we've tried to get collateral. Well, I've never done a case where collateral has been required for probate. It's almost never the situation that we run into. Court bonds are different. For example, when you're appealing a judgment, that is a pretty high risk bond. No carrier is going to write that without collateral.
It's an interesting one from Chris. What about child services? Do they seek agents for bonds in any circumstances?
I've never run into that, but it's possible they could be behind the scenes for an application I've handled in the past. I'm not sure. It's always court ordered, so perhaps in consultation with the court determined that a bond should be required for a minor, the estate of a minor, or then yes. But I'm not sure, to be completely honest with you.
I can't imagine somebody from child services though would be able to be the fiduciary. So I can imagine it'd only be like in a consulting role that they might be involved. Okay.
I would agree with that. And for minors, typically the funds that are owed to a minor are from like a life insurance policy or something like that, some unsecured funds. Some policies do have it so that they will be secured, but typically it's a life insurance policy that's just liquid that the guardian would have access to that is causing a bond to be required.
Perfect. And then, yeah, I think somebody said, thanks for having this webinar. Thank you so much. We love having you guys. And we have one last question that we will give to Benton. Can you explain the difference between direct bill and agency bill?
Sure. These can be issued either way. Of course, if you're issuing it via agency bill, definitely be sure to collect that prior to issuing it. Haven't run into situations where an agent has issued it on agency bill, never been able to collect. In that case, we are going to request the agent pay us back unless there's a very valid explanation for it. So just definitely be sure that you collect that premium before issuing it on agency bill. That way you don't run into that problem. You can even issue it on agency bill for renewals if you'd like. Most agents prefer to issue these on direct bill so they don't have that risk.
Got it. Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Benton. That was probably the most questions I've had you answer on one of these webinars, but we are so thankful to have you. And thank you all to the agents who joined today. I know we're all just looking to learn the most we can about these bonds and make it as easy and transactional for our clients as well as, profitable for our agents. So if you had an additional question that did not get answered, or you just have an additional question that pops up in the future, please reach out to us. You can also just reply to my email inviting you to the webinar. We will be sending out this recording later today to everybody, so please feel free to pass it along to members of your team as well. But thank you so much for your time today, guys, and we will see you on the next webinar.